Today I'm going to be sharing tips and tricks creating a crackle effect on wood, stain art, and using the burn method. For the burn method, we are going to be using this really cool wall decor piece you can pick up from Dollar Tree. I wanted to find something as absolutely complicated as I could get other than us just using a solid piece of wood. At one point in my DIY adventures, I created this adorable beaded dowel tabletop decor piece using this stunning napkin. And what did I apply this beautiful napkin onto? Well, nothing other than a Dollar Tree wood palette. These are my favorite wood pieces at Dollar Tree, hands down. Look how stunning this turned out. Just applied it on here. I trimmed off the excess and left just enough for me to burn off. And truth be told, people, my favorite way to get rid of excess napkin is just to sand it. Also, keep in mind, the burn method is not my original idea. And I really feel like I was bullied and harassed by most of you to try the burn method to begin with. I'm just kidding. In this footage we're taking a look back at is my first time trying the burn method. And I wanted to share that with you for anyone that has not done this or anyone that has done this and has made mistakes and has wondered where they screwed up at. I certainly did. And thanks to my wonderful community, I have been giving a ton of tips and information that we're going to go over today in this video so you don't have to sweat it in your next DIY project using the burn method. And people, I held the flame in one section too long. The Mod Podge started burning through the project. The piece turned out really cute anyway, despite all the little mishaps I had here for my first time trying this, but let's make sure you don't make the same mistakes. One of the biggest tips I got was to not let the Mod Podge dry. Okay, now, unfortunately, I'm not going to do that today because we're going to use the iron-on method, because I have also heard that you need to burn from underneath, not from the side or the top. That also plays a factor, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And I have done a little bit of research here, and you can absolutely apply your napkin or your paper, if that's what you want to use, even though paper doesn't seem to be as thin as a napkin, and still get it to burn. I'm going to use Mod Podge for our application, and I'm just going to be using a napkin today. And yes, I do sell napkin bundles on my website. No, I do not have this one available anymore. Sorry. This is my stash, so it's one of my favorites. So we're going to be applying this on here, and I'm going to be using the iron-on method just because it is such a complex piece for us to apply this onto. I want to make sure that the napkin is on here 100%, and I know that the iron-on method is going to basically melt the napkin onto the piece. If you have never decoupaged a napkin before, there are a couple ways that you can go about doing this. My favorite, because you got to get these sneaky layers off, we're only going to be decoupaging the top layer onto this joint, is to tear a corner. If you tear a corner, it allows you to be able to see the sneaky layers underneath, and then you can just plop it right off, okay? If you don't want to do this because you literally need the entire napkin, you can take a little bit of Mod Podge on between your pointer, in between your pointer and your thumb, and then just... and the corner will reveal, just like it kind of started pulling off there. Or you can take a piece of painter's tape, apply it on the corner on one side, apply it on the corner on the other side, and then just pull. And it's going to pull off your layers. You might have to do that a couple times, depending on how many layers you have. But to start off, before we even get to the point where we can start to burn, we need to make sure that we apply the steps we need to decoupage correctly. And I'm telling you, people, be careful, because look how thin that layer, it really makes you feel like you already got them off. But most napkins, in my experience, are at least 3-ply. So you got those 2 layers underneath. I'm not going to go real deep into the whole decoupaging aspect of this because we're here for the burn method. I will link my playlist down in the description box. I have a ton of videos on decoupage if you're not familiar with me. And if you are, y'all know I got some decoupage videos. But I don't want to take up your viewing time going into a whole bunch of detail about this. What I will say is make sure for your iron-on method, if you're doing it like this, that you are getting right up to the edges and that you have a nice, thick, healthy layer. You're gonna let this dry for 30 minutes and then come back and iron on your napkin. Our Mod Podge is all dried up and we are ready to go. I'm using a little Cricut iron for our application. So first I'm just kind of starting at the edge and little circular motions. I'm gonna go all the way up, pulling the napkin tight as I go to ensure our bond. And then we're gonna burn this sucker off. Our napkin is really on here, so I'm going to just kind of cut some of the extra off, leaving a little bit around the edges. A few tips before you start to burn your piece. You want to have something to catch your little flyaway bits, okay? Because there's going to be some. One idea for you would be to get a tray, put some water in that. You could also get a damp towel, make sure it's wet, and lay it underneath of your piece. So when you're burning and then you have the little crusty bits flying away, it lands on something. Or you can do what I'm gonna do, go outside. Well, not really going outside because there's actually several inches of snow. So we're in a garage and we're going to go up underneath. We're gonna start with the edge, go up underneath, and it should burn it fairly evenly. Ooh, fingers. Woo! Flawless. Now we're gonna have to get the little holes. So we're gonna go up under each one. And in case you're wondering what kind of lighter I'm using, it's one of these little joints. It's like a torch lighter. Just gonna go up underneath here. And I gotta tell you, this tip is fire. Going up underneath of it, instead of doing, yeah, I don't like that. The flame is way bigger. And if, look, it's also causing me to do what I had done before where I could possibly burn my Mod Podge. This is stopping that completely. Awesome tip. Burning underneath of it stops you from being able to do that. Look at us learning together. Oh, is my lighter running out? Oh no. Oh, it is. Don't die on me yet. We got things to burn. Oh, it is. Just hurry up and do those last ones. If you're not a fan of rustic things, this little trick might not be for you. And I say that because there is a lot of scorched edging, which I love. I usually do a lot of antiquing towards the ends of projects, especially with wood. This kind of just saves you that time. Now you want to pick whatever sealer, go over this, and be done with it. You can add yourself a little bow up here, a little floral, hang this off your front door. Super, super beautiful. And for those of you that picked up that I didn't put no parchment paper over this napkin before I ironed it, back off. I'm a rebel sometimes, but if you don't want a chance doing an iron-on method with your decoupage without the parchment paper, you do you. Creating a crackle look on your wood can be done a multitude of ways. This trick can really give your new wood a vintage feel. One of the ways I have transformed pieces in the past is to create a multi-layer look underneath of the crackle. You can do this by taking several different colors or even leaving sections of your wood exposed so they show through your medium with your top layer. Using a heat gun can really enhance the appearance of that crackle, and today we're going to be breaking down some awesome tips and tricks. I thought it would be super cool to crackle the life out of this beautiful rolling pin that I have. I picked this up on clearance some time ago from Dollar General. It was originally $4. And I think I got it 50% off, so I paid $2 for it. I just think it would look awesome crackled up. Plus, I have a DIY for this later on down the road that I'm gonna use. I'm gonna be using Folk Art Home Decor Crackle. If you're not familiar with crackling, if you've never done this before, there are a ton of ways you can get this look without having to use a medium like this. One being Mod Podge. And Mod Podge even has its own crackle medium. Elmer's glue is another way that you can get a crackle effect. And other brands like Dixie Belle even have their own crackle medium. There are a ton of different options for you to be able to do that. This is how I use this and get an awesome effect. I'm going to use some black chalk paint for our base. What I mean about that is this is the color that we're going to see underneath of the crackle. You can paint this any color you want. You can do a purple, you could do a pink. I personally like using chalk paints when I'm doing the first initial coat and even the second coat. I'm not a huge fan of acrylics for this. If I'm doing a stain, that's a little bit different because it kind of seeps into the wood. But I'm going to be using this, so once the crackle decides to crackle on us or starts to crackle on us, that's the color we're going to see through. If I didn't apply the black one here, what we're going to see is this beautiful neutral color. You figure out what combination works best for you and what you want to actually see underneath of your crackle, and that's what you roll on with. Before you apply this stuff, one huge tip to remember is this stuff has an attitude. So once you have this applied on your piece, you're going to need to work very gingerly. Getting it on your piece is really simple. The application process, you just kind of swipe it on here and then move on. This is going to take at least 30 minutes to dry fully, and you're going to want to make sure that this stuff is dry. Follow the directions on the bottle. There are some on there for you. And keep in mind that only where you place the crackle is where it's going to show up. So if you go across the whole thing, and the more you put on here, the heavier the crackle is going to be as it dries. If you don't put any, which I'll leave some spots where I don't put any, there's not going to be any crackle there, which is awesome for when you're decoupaging things. If you just want to have some little cracks around the edges and keep your beautiful design in the center whole without having any of that, that will give you that amazing effect. But it doesn't really matter to me if I go across the whole thing, but I also want to leave, you know, some spots on here where it's full. So I left a little gap right there. And then there's, I thought I left another one. Here it is. There's another little gap right there where there won't be really any crackle. Not a whole lot. I really want to kind of do the whole thing. Now I'm going to let this dry. We are all dry. Now it's time to DIY. Remember I said this stuff has an attitude, and this is where that comes in. Whatever your top layer you're putting on this is, you're going to get one swipe. And I mean that because for whatever reason, once you start painting, see how you can see the mediums here? If you pull down with your first application, you're good to go. Leave it alone. Just walk away. Okay? Walk away at that point. However, if you feel like, oh, you need a little bit more, you need the color to be thicker right there, You're then going to pull this away. And I've made this mistake on actual furniture pieces before. So what's going to happen then is you're going to have a gap where you can see like a pile of the medium kind of around a gap in your piece. Now we're not going to make that mistake on this. I'm telling you, so you don't make that mistake at home. We're going to do one swipey swipe as often as we can on the piece, okay, from one end to the next. At least that's our hope. You load your brush up, and actually I'm going to wet down my paint so this way it goes smoother. It has been my experience. Also, another good tip is to make sure that your paint isn't necessarily runny, but that is thin enough so when you go down this way, if you're using a thicker paint, it doesn't stop midway through. I have it watered down enough. I feel confident with this. This is DIY's clay-based paint. You can use chalk paint. I use that all the time for furniture pieces. I've used Waverly with this. I've used Dixie Belle with this. This is absolutely your decision what paint you want to apply over. Just letting you know what we're using today. Now we're going to start at one end and just bring it on down in one continuous stroke. See how the paint's running out there? Ooh, that's why it's important to make sure you have a nice healthy amount and that your paint, it's already starting. Look at that. So I'm going to continue the same technique. I'm just going to close in that little gap right there and then pull down. If you have some if you have some overhang like this, gently just kind of bring it in together. And a lot of the paints that I use kind of do their own self-leveling thing. So I'm not really worried about that at all. Not all paints are created equal, so be mindful whenever you're doing that, especially if you're reselling pieces. It's important to use good quality paint. This next tip I actually learned from Sammy over at Unicorn Dust Designs. I have to give her all the credit for this. I can take a heat gun. You can see the cracks and they're beautiful, right? But for whatever reason, adding heat to this sucker, it's going to expand your cracks. Well, it would if I had this plugged in. Sorry. Excuse me while I had to get my life together. Now, heat gun. At this current moment, I have only used the heat gun on this side, and that's because I wanted to show you that there actually is a difference when you're doing that with the heat gun. The cracks do become larger and more dominant. So see how small they kind of are over here, and then look at how large they are on this side. Kind of pull it back so you can compare this to that. I'm completely in love with this, and I'm going to leave it just like this for the sake of this video, but you will see this piece again in my content. Stain art is very versatile and an amazing way to create unique looks. There are so many different ways you can use this idea, and I'm going to be sharing tips and tricks of the basics. One of my favorite ways to do this is to take a piece of wood and mix multiple colors. This is very beginner basic and really helps you get a feel for how creating your own stain soaks into the wood and how it dries lighter than what it usually looks, as well as getting the hang of blending. One of my favorite ways to end with these pieces is to make it look like it's wood, so I like to stain the wood and blend it in with the colors, and we're going to be doing all of that right now. I want you to keep in mind this technique you can actually use on furniture as well. I have done this on furniture pieces, on tabletops. I've done this on larger wall pieces, and you can put vinyls over them. It's absolutely beautiful depending on the way that you want to create this. Just takes a little bit of patience. We're going to be using these 3 colors today, and they are acrylic. I like using acrylic paints. They're easy to mix with water and give a really cool stain look. I almost never measure. I usually wing, but for the sake of the video today, we are going to measure. So when you do this at home, you have all the tips and tricks that you need to be able to recreate it. We're gonna start off by putting our little squirts in. And I'm probably using about a teaspoon of paint in there. And I'm gonna do that for each one. About a teaspoon. And then this pretty color, about a teaspoon. There we go. I don't have a measuring cup down here in the craft cave, but what I do have is a little bottle of water I keep to refill my little spray bottle. So you'll see that it is right underneath this blue line, and we're not going to use a whole bunch. Probably about a 1/4 cup in each one of these. I'm just going to kind of eyeball that. Use whatever you want to mix it up. I just had a dowel laying around here, and just spend about 30 seconds stirring it up till you don't see any clumpy bits of that acrylic paint laying around. Tools for the trade here are going to be paintbrushes and napkins, okay? Paintbrush to apply the stain and napkin to wipe it back. Good thing to know is that the longer you allow this to sit on here, the darker the color is going to be. But also be mindful, because you will have striations, and we want this to be blended. Because this is the first layer, I'm going to leave it sit on here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about with the striations. This is soaking in, and as it's soaking in, you can see the line where the paint ends. Well, our stain, our DIY stain. And you might ask, Brandy, why aren't we doing this with just a paint? Well, the paint is going to cover over the wood grains. And I don't want to cover over the wood grains. I want to just keep the wood grains, create a stain, and allow beautiful colors to pop through on our wood, giving it an entirely different look. If you leave your paint sit on there too long, this is what's going to happen. When you go to wipe it back, you can see the lines. So you want to keep that in mind. Even if I remove the whole thing, what can you see? The end lines, okay? So that is going to make your stain look wonky. You don't want to do that. What you can do instead is a heavier layer of paint. Like if you want it to get on here, have it heavy. And then pull it. And then do the same thing in the same spot. It's going to take you a couple times, but you're not going to have those harsh lines. Instead, you can see the color starting to come up. So the longer you leave it on here, like if you want to leave it on for a couple seconds, the deeper this color is going to get, which is fine. Leave it on for a couple seconds, pull it back. And each time you do it, leave it on for a couple seconds, the color is going to get deeper. Pull it back. This is preventing those harsh lines, and instead it's creating a blend. So the longer you leave it on, the deeper your color gets. But be mindful leaving it on too long, because you will then get these awkward lines in there that don't actually blend in with the wood grains. If you're just doing one color, obviously this doesn't matter, but I like to live on the edge, and we're going to do several colors, and I'm never really sure how I want this to go until it starts happening. I will also tell you that I think it's a good idea whenever you're doing this to go with the grain of the wood. Just looks natural to me when you're doing stain art like this. The idea is to make it look very natural with your wood piece. You do not want to add the Waverly wax, don't. You don't have to. This is just something I like to do. It, to me, gives it just a hint of a, oh my gosh, is that actually wood? Or, you know what I mean? Like, is that made like that? Or was it created like that? And try and be mindful as you're doing it to really rub across so you don't have any harsh spots of just stopping. So if I wouldn't have started rubbing that completely towards the edge, there would have been a little stoppage there instead of some blending. If you want to stop here, by all means, you go right ahead. This is completely dry. It's the next day. I'm not going to stop here. We're going to pop a raised stencil on top of this sucker. There are a bunch of different ways you can create a raised stencil. I used to use joint compound, and I still do on certain pieces depending upon what I'm doing. One of my recent favorite finds is Tim Holtz texture paste. It is non-toxic. It does not have a smell to it. It dries really well. And I do like to seal over my pieces. Once this is completely dry, I'll usually wait a day or two to be able to do that. You want to tape down your stencil so this way it doesn't move, and then get to applying. As always, thank y'all so much for hanging out with me today. I hope these wood tips and tricks help to elevate your DIY game a little bit on your next wood project. And until next time.